What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbuds, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. That is One Pie Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. It's pro 2_ANT. Find me on Blue Sky at PROANT. No underscores there on Blue Sky, just pro ant. In this episode of Disguise Coverage, this is the last one here on Disguise Coverage that is kind of setting the table before we fully dive into prospect evaluation. Full tilt. What's up, Ron? I see you there in the chat. How you doing? Before we fully dive into position group analysis, prospect evaluation here on the show. A little bit of housekeeping. What I have for you folks the next several weeks is positions of need for the Buffalo Bills. And I will be diving into day one possibilities, day two possibilities, day three possibilities. And I will be doing so with a different guest each week, diving into different position groups, getting their thoughts, what they like from the position group, their evaluations, skill sets, traits, fits for the Bills. Again, on each day, all of that going forward. So that will start next week, leading us up into the draft. So I'm excited for the next several weeks, really full steam ahead, getting into anything and everything for these positions and needs, the prospects, all that stuff for the draft. And before we get to that, again, I wanted to just have this last episode to kind of finish setting the table for the Bills. What we did on last week's episode kind of looked at the Bills roster from a 2025 perspective, but also from a future perspective, and then took a look at positions of need based off of that to kind of see, what does this roster look like right now? What does it look like in the future? What do they need now? What do they need for the future? We looked at players from a quality perspective currently on the roster and from a contract perspective, and then tie that into some prospects that could potentially fit the Bills roster needs on day 1 and 2. In this episode, some more prospect discussion, but more from the conversation and discussion aspect of the archetypes that the Bills have at these positions of need. I think a lot of this conversation, and we do this every year, and I'm not even just saying within the Bills community, but I think, fans at large or teams at large, so much of the conversation of, man, I want this guy, or man, I want that guy, I think a lot of it tends to get lost within the scope of what does the team tend to gravitate towards. And I'm even guilty of this. And then I usually try to label these discussions, these points, especially on social. So much for me is like, man, I want them to take this guy. And I always try to put the little like asterisk or the caveat of, they probably won't because he doesn't fit because X, Y, and Z, but I'd like them to take this guy because I think he could help them do this or help them tweak this or evolve in this way, so on and so forth. And so much of the conversation when it comes to draft time isn't just, a player that you like or the individual evaluation. It's, do they fit the scheme? Do they fit the archetype for that position group? If, I'm just to give a random example, like if you really like this corner because this team, this example I'm going to use is going to feel specific, but it wasn't, I swear. This corner is really good at man coverage, and do you want that corner because you want them to play more man coverage, but does that team really play man coverage? Are they good at it? Do they play more zone? Is it vice versa? You want, this smaller, shifty route running type of receiver. Is that the type of offense do they run? Do they need bigger bodies? Do they need guys that can block? Do they need guys that can work in condensed sets? Do you need someone inside, outside, so on and so forth? And so I wanted to dive into this episode again, looking at several positions of need, continuing the conversation we had last week and focusing on my biggest areas of need for the Buffalo Bills here, and just taking a look at having a conversation, I should say, centered around taking a look into this roster, what the Bills have done traditionally at these positions, and then tying that into prospects that could potentially fit that mold, using them as an example. I'm not going to be diving too much into prospects in this episode. Again, that's going to come in the next several weeks, and a bit like we did last week in last week's episode. But if you do have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns on any prospects throughout the episode tonight, if you are joining me live, feel free to put it up into the chat. I will answer anything and everything that I can as it comes through. If you're not watching live or joining us live and you're watching later, listening later, whatever have you, leave a comment on YouTube, get at me on one of the socials, anything and anything I can answer for you. I gladly will. and shall. So again, yeah, not diving into too many prospects, but giving several prospects as examples, why they fit, why they don't, so on and so forth. But again, feel free to put anything and everything that you got into the chat. Super chats, as always, get priority because I respect the monetary donation and I see the color and it takes me away from my notes and allows me to focus on that. But I will try to get to everything in the chat as humanly possible. Going through some of the stuff now. Appreciate you, Ron, for the very kind words. RJ with some news that happened in the last hour or so, maybe hour and a half. RJ says, "Hey everyone," he said, "not looking forward to Diggs trying only 2 games a year against the Bills." Yeah, Stephon Diggs signed a 3-year contract with the New England Patriots up to $69 million. I think $26 million guaranteed. I'm interested to see how the contract kind of lays out in terms of how much money will he actually realistically accrue over those 3 years. Is it a true 3? Is it more of a 2 plus a 1? Is it more of a 1 plus a 2? Interested to see what that looks like for Stephon Diggs, and interesting for the fit. I think the fit works. I like Drake May as a quarterback. I think what Diggs can do to elevate that wide receiver room and how he fits with May and the offense. Again, we'll see new coaching staff, yada yada, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's a good fit for Drake May at least. We'll see if it's a good fit for Diggs and what that means for the Pats. Yeah, I still think he's got some good juice left in the tank. He looked good in Houston last year. Man, Houston kind of got robbed a little bit last year. Nico Collins went down for a good chunk of the year, and then Diggs went down, and then Tank Dell went down. They still, went to the playoffs and did their thing, Final Four team. But yeah, lost a little bit of an opportunity to kind of see what they could have done in the AFC last year. Baldy Lock saying, "Good evening, everybody. What's up? What's up?" Billy D says, "Do we double up?" Ooh, man, this is a hard-hitting question right off rip. Billy D says, "Do we double up on corner and let Benford walk after the season?" Oof. Two things. One, even the most surefire can't miss prospect isn't a surefire can't miss prospect. So you could take a corner with every single pick in this draft, and there's a chance that every single one of those corners are going to bottom out and you're not going to get what you want. Granted, I doubt that would happen, but still, just kind of putting it out there from an odds probability perspective. Christian Benford has been crushing it. CB1, I think he's still ascending a bit. I think he's getting close to that ceiling, but he's continued to improve year over year. I don't mind if they double dip on corner, strictly because I don't think the long-term answers at corner are on this roster. We talked about it last week. Right now, you're looking at Benford, you're looking at Dane Jackson, you're looking at Jamarcus Ingram. Like, I think and Dane Jackson only signed a 1 year. I think you legitimately have questions on the Bills roster right now at CB2 and CB3. I think Dane is more of a CB4 to a high-end CB3 just based on the system. Jamarcus Ingram has some inside-outside versatility, but is very much unproven. If you wanted to plug him anywhere on the depth chart, I wouldn't really fight you too much. But I like the idea of double dipping, especially, if they get a corner on or at pick 30, or even on if it comes in round 2 and then taking another one in round 4 or round 5, depending on what you got with whoever falls. I like the idea of double dipping a corner. Ooh, letting Benford walk, I think, is just very, very, very risky. Who knows? If you like what you get from the corners, maybe there's something they see that we don't know and they feel comfortable doing it. I'm very hesitant to let a very good player at a premium position walk. I don't think it's completely crazy, but I would not advocate for that at this state in the game, or stage of the game. Man, 8 minutes, 55 seconds in, first flub. I think I had one during the intro too, so maybe that is I've had a flub before this, but I apologize for that. I like where your head's at, though. Interesting. Getting the juices flowing. I like it. Ron says, hopefully they make a shift at defensive tackle and go bigger. We will definitely be getting into that conversation tonight when it comes to the defensive tackle piece. Ron also following up with some secondary stuff, saying we need more speed and athleticism in the secondary, especially at corner. We will be talking about that. I like where your head is at already. Oh, man. Baldy saying, or see what we can get for corner and triple dip. Man, people like not advocating for jettisoning Benford out, but man, Ron says we need to add 2 CBs in the draft. John, what's up, John? John says Bean is always negotiating. We just don't know about it. I trust in Bean to extend Benford. I do as well. Just with how everything's shaken out. Maybe it's one that happens later in the spring or in the summer or right before in camp or right before the start of the season. The way his fit has been, being a homegrown guy, being within the system for all these years, I think it just makes logical sense to extend him. I would be disappointed if they did not, especially considering that, what they paid at other spots. Um, but, that's just my 2 cents. No pun intended. RJ says, after what happened with Elam, you keep Benford. I would like to see them keep Christian Benford again. I feel like it's the success of Christian Benford cost Kyer Elam. I feel like Elam was Gamora and the Bills were Thanos. And to get that Soul Stone and Christian Benford, it cost Kyer Elam, but it is what it is. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I think with that being said, let's dive into corner in terms of being, the first position we talk about here. My number one position of need currently on this roster. Talked about the reasons why for that in last week's episode. Not trying to do a cheap plug for last week's episode, but if you didn't catch that, get into that episode for the reasons why with corner, interior defensive line, edge, wide receiver, safety, what the roster looks like now under contract, quality, depth chart this year, next year, the go forward, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to rehash too much of it in this episode, but I did a deep dive into all of that last week. When it comes to corner, what I think is very interesting with this spot, and some of you guys have already alluded to it in the chat, what I would like for them to have at corner, let me start with that going forward. And I've talked about it on the show. I've talked about it really for the past couple of seasons. What the Bills need at corner, especially with what we saw in 2024, they need more airspace restrictors. They need corners who can play and tighten passing windows. Now, this can happen in a multitude of ways. It could be a corner who plays press. It could be a corner who's very good at man coverage. It could be a corner that's good at both of those things. It could be a corner who's got a quick trigger or good eyes and has the ability to jump routes or play with anticipation, read receivers. There's a multitude of ways in which you can kind of address this. The easiest for me, or kind of low access that I'm thinking about, it's part of the reason why I gravitated towards somebody like Trey Amos, is play some press. Get into receivers on the line of scrimmage. You can either have a true press and jam them at the line, or you can just soft shoe, mirror them with your feet, that type of deal. But give me somebody who's capable of playing press. Give me somebody who's capable of playing man coverage, somebody who's able to stay in phase and stay in the kitchen of these wide receivers and restrict that airspace, create a disconnect between the timing of the receiver and the timing of the quarterback. So if they look and they're trying to throw something quick, or they got a 1 to 3 step drop and they're looking to spit it out fast, and there's a corner either right on my guy and the stem has changed and I can't throw it right now, or the coverage is too tight and I don't want to throw it, or you've got a corner who's sitting off a little bit, but you know that he's sitting on a certain type of route. He's got the trigger where he can jump and close and make you pay if you throw it out there and your location isn't right or the timing isn't right. They need more airspace restrictors, constrictors at that spot. I also think, to Ron's points earlier, it was Ron, I want to make sure, yes. I think some of that also ties into the speed and athleticism in the secondary as a whole, but especially at corner. I would like them to be able to kind of fight fire with fire at the wide receiver spot for years. And also, too, let's not I don't want to cast anybody in too much of a bad light because they've had good corner play. But Trey White, was more technical than he was anything, and he was tremendous. He was an all-pro. Benford really ticks a lot of boxes in a multitude of ways, is a good athlete. I wouldn't say necessarily a plus athlete or a burner, but the size, the length, the physicality, the flexibility, the hip sync, he's able to do so much, the route recognition, the confidence, all of those things. He ticks a lot of boxes, but Rasul Douglas wasn't a burner, but was a good corner until he kind of fell off a little bit in 2024. And aside from that, corner 2 has always been the Levi Wallaces, the Dane Jacksons, these guys that are very technically sound, functionally responsible in their assignments and their responsibilities, but not necessarily overly athletic or juiced up or, this really big, strong guy, or guys with good length, guys with good athleticism, guys that are good with man coverage, so on and so forth. They kind of had this mold and that archetype has been guys that are responsible, guys that will be there in their spot when they need to be in their spot and be where the coaching staff expects and be where the rest of the defense and their teammates expect them to be. Now, the one time they kind of deviated from that was Kyer Elam. Instead of going for the scheme fit, instead of going with the archetype fit, they went for more of the traits and more of the tools. They went for the better athlete. They went for the speed, the size, the length, the athleticism. That's what they went for. And it didn't work out, unfortunately, for them. I still think they need to go in that vein. I just think they can't swing so far to that side and into the traits and into the tools. I said it when they drafted him. I maintained it the whole time. I didn't like the fit for Elam when the Bills drafted him. I just, with how much man he played and the type of man coverage he played, not having illegal contact as a penalty in college, he was able to just mug receivers left and right, grab, punch, hold, anything and everything until that ball was in the air. And when you do that with his size and length and athleticism and speed, it created a huge advantage for him. I didn't think that would play in the NFL, but again, he had a good head on his shoulders. He was a smart kid. He is a smart kid. He had the tools, and the Bills have gotten so much blood out of other corners and those stones. I was like, okay, if there is upside here, let's see what you get. Obviously, that never came to fruition, and Kyrie Elam was traded to the Cowboys this offseason a couple weeks ago. I still do think you need to move in that regard. I think you need to go towards someone who gives you a little more twitch, gives you a little more juice, gives you a little more athleticism. When you start to play these better teams in the playoffs, you're going to eventually come across somebody that has size and speed and athleticism at the wide receiver position. I mean, even if we look at what the Eagles had last year, like could the Bills fight fire with fire and find somebody to match up against A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith? Cincinnati's O-line is an issue, but with the Bengals, do you have somebody who can combat Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? Or even with the Ravens, do you have somebody who can run with Zay Flowers and stick with him? Gives all these small little examples, but I say all that to say, give me more athleticism in the secondary, which is a bit of an archetype shift than years past. And aside from that, they need someone who can play press or who has a quick trigger, who can restrict airspace and squeeze passing windows. Again, all of it comes down to squeezing those windows and making things tighter. And you can do it right from the line of scrimmage and right from the snap, or you can do it a little bit after, again, by sitting and having that ability to come forward, close down, drive on routes, being good at the break, not allowing guys to separate in the stem or separating on the break. You have really the three phases of a route. You have the release when they're coming off the line of scrimmage. You have the stem, which is how they kind of build their route. And then you have the break, the cut, where are they moving? What are they doing? How are they changing that stem? So you have the opportunity to squeeze the passing window and restrict that receiver space and the offense's airspace at all three of those spots. So you can do it at the release, you can do it in the stem, and you can do it on the break. And you can do it with a multitude of ways. You can do it by being in press. You can do it by being in press and jamming on the snap. You can do it by being in press, but just kind of mirroring and having good feet and being a good athlete. Or you could do it by being in off, maybe stepping up a little bit and then squeezing things on the break as opposed to squeezing it in the stem or squeezing it on the release. All of those things take varied techniques, varied skill sets, varied traits, but a common theme amongst a lot of them would be good feet, good athleticism, some sort of short area burst or quickness, the ability to not let guys get into your body. It comes down to how guys are built in terms of their frame physically, and also in terms of how they play the game, what tools and traits they have, but also the coverages that they come from. Again, not to, drum on this too much. Trey Amos ticks a heavy majority, if not all of these boxes for the Buffalo Bills. His ability to play press, his length, plus feet, and the combination of those two things allowing him to stay in phase and man coverage, the zone coverage capabilities, how he can fall off and collect with regularity, his match coverage capabilities, the tackling, the physicality, what he offers. He ticks so many of these boxes. I think Jahdae Barron ticks a lot of boxes from the physicality perspective as well, but a different type. I don't think he's the same kind of press corner that Amos is, but his quick trigger, the short area burst, he's got great peripheral vision. So he can have that kind of hinge and that turn where he's looking at the quarterback, but as soon as the receiver breaks in on a slant or an in and he sees that flash of color, he can drive on it and close and break that pass up. But he's also got the ability to do that and still read the QB and see, oh, he's actually still hitting his drop, or that's just a pump. Let me slam on the brakes because now it's actually a slant and go. So the technique plus his vision and processing and athleticism allow him to tighten passing windows and restrict airspace. And also what he is as a force player, as a tackler, as a guy in the run fit, he ticks so many boxes as well. I really do look for one, I wanted to use those two guys in juxtaposition with one another because I think they're different players, but I both think they can help the Bills defense at corner in their move towards kind of tweaking the archetype a little bit, just in different ways. And it really helped the defense kind of evolve schematically. And again, have more athleticism, more juice on the back end, but more airspace constriction and be able to tighten passing windows. I think at the end of the day, I think Barron's going to be gone. I think the corners you're really looking at for the Bills in this draft are guys with some length and guys who can play press. And there's a variety of them. You've got Trey Amos. You've got Darian Porter from Iowa State. You've got Azarai Thomas from Florida State. Just kind of throwing out some names in terms of, day one and day two guys. And I do think they go corner on day one or day two. I haven't finished Benjamin Morris yet, so if anyone wants to ask me about him, I have not taken a peek at him yet. You've got Siobhan Revel or Siobhan Revel. I've heard multiple ways of his name being pronounced to him and him responding, so I don't even know what the correct pronunciation is at this point. I have some questions on Revel. I personally don't gravitate towards guys that are high cut, meaning guys that have like long legs and kind of shorter torsos. And I think that can lead to issues with change of direction, hip sync, fluidity. And I do have some questions with Revel. I'm going to say his name like 75 different ways throughout this episode, throughout this draft cycle. But I like him as a press corner. I do think he has to be more of a true press corner because he is higher cut and longer legs. I think change of direction is going to be an issue, so I don't think he necessarily is that guy that's going to be able to mirror someone and kind of soft shoe press them and just be able to stay in their kitchen with footwork and hip fluidity and sync and all that. I think he needs to use his length, use his size, use his frame, and get on guys early. When he does have a true press, he tends to go with the two-hand jam, which I don't love because you can essentially get kind of locked in your hips. Like when you go forward like that, you're locking your hips when you go with that two-hand jam or that two-hand true press. And if you miss a guy and you don't get those hands, now your transition getting upfield and turning to run with that guy is a little suspect. And that's even more so for a guy who I think has some change of direction or some, hip fluidity type of pieces. And I also think just again, because he's high cut, he plays a little tight. Tight. Tight in the hips, but a little upright. As a player, there's not a lot of dip, bend, sink to his game. And then because, again, he is that higher cut, I think on breaks, he can allow some separation and things. But I think he's another name to consider. I think anybody who has length and can play press in this draft class should be a name that the Bills look towards. And they've met with a lot of these guys. Again, my ideal candidate right now is Trey Amos at pick 30. I've been in this camp since before the combine, and then he ran a 4.43, and that kind of solidified things for me. But that's kind of where I'm at. Again, just because I think I would love Jahdae Barron at 30, I really don't think he's going to be there. So but I wanted to use him and Amos, use him in these other corners as a juxtaposition of what you can have. But I think the Bills will end up with a longer press type of corner in this draft, and I think a lot of the ones that are available fit what you're trying to do from a scheme standpoint. I don't think the guys that I named aren't another Kyer Elam situation where it's like, well, yeah, but are they going to be able to adjust to the scheme? Can they learn it? So on and so forth. I think they're more of kind of natural fits, especially if you're kind of simplifying or tweaking a little bit with what the defense does, which should be some more match coverage, some more man coverage. Either way, more man principles baked into the zone coverage. And even if it was just regular zone, these corners all can function in a zone capacity as well. So again, Bill's traditional archetype at corner is less to do with athleticism, less to do with size, less to do with speed. And it's traditionally been more of responsibility, playing from the neck up, sound, smart, reliable, responsible. I think they need to tweak that a little bit. And if you can get guys that are still that, but also be good athletes and then fit the scheme, hooray. And I think a lot of these guys that I mentioned, especially Trey Amos, tick that box. But I think they need to tweak that archetype a little bit and add in a little more athleticism, a little more juice, a little more foot speed, a little more flexibility, change that position a little bit. Less technically sound, less responsible, reliable, a little more twitch, a little more juice, a little more physical traits while not losing the responsibility and the assignment sound and scheme fit nature, all of it. Again, I think there's a happy medium to kind of really juxtapose it and move on to some of your comments before we go to the next position grouping. I don't no disrespect to anyone, I don't want Dane Jackson, but I don't want Kyer Elam. Okay. And that's the opposite ends of the spectrum. There's plenty of space all in here for them to tweak that a little bit. Like Dane Jackson is 90-10 towards one way. I think Kyer Elam was 90-10 towards the other. We don't need that. You can go 70-30 either way. You could go 60-40. It could be 55-45. They need some balance of that. Again, I don't want to swing just for the traits and just for the sexiness like they did with Kyer. And I don't want to just hit a bunch of singles and have to steal bases if that guy gets on base. It's kind of the way I'm looking at it for corner. Let's go to some of the questions for you folks. Ron says the problem with this scheme, going back to earlier, is we get abused in the playoffs because our DBs can't match up. Again, that's what it's hard to be technically sound over and over and over and over again. That's what I'm saying. Like you need to be able to fight fire with fire a little bit, And Ron says, yeah, with the DBs we've had, yeah, you have to be able to fight fire with fire a little bit. You don't have to be a burner or the most physically imposing guy to stick with like AJ Brown or stick with Jamar Chase. You can do it with technique, but your technique, you have such little margin for error because those guys have physical dominant traits or athletically dominant traits that if you're not on point with your footwork or your timing or your turn or your pedal, you're in a bad way. And I think that's where the Bills have lived for a lot of that time. This is hilarious and how accurate it is. This guy says, I realize cover one glazes the team. First off, glazes grow up the team because they could get sued for using all that footage if they said anything negative. That's not true at all. This is such a wildly inaccurate comment. I just wanted to pull out. That's mad funny. Jared says, I say trade up for Will Johnson or Emin Wari if either are still on the board at 17 or 19. The Bengals and Bucks need picks. Maybe get Kobe Bryant in the 4th round. Yeah, Kobe Bryant, another Kobe Bryant. Spelled differently than the Kobe Bryant from Cincinnati a couple years ago who plays in Seattle. I haven't watched Kobe Bryant yet from Kansas. I have not taken a peek at him yet, but he's a name as I start to finish out corners we go forward. I would be all aboard for Will Johnson. I don't think Emin Wari is a scheme fit, and I'm not that high personally on him as a prospect. I don't think he plays to the athleticism and size that he tested with, and his feet are a bit clunky, kind of like he has cement in his shoes. I think he's more scheme specific than he is just kind of a plug and play guy with a multitude of teams. And I don't individually love the fit for the Bills, but to each their own. Also, Emin Wari finished 3rd in my Heisman, in the Heisman running my first year playing NCAA 25 when we won the Natty with South Carolina. So he does hold a special play in my heart. Tank Ninja says, to be fair, it's not like Douglas was doing us any favors, not getting DPI and et cetera last year, and he didn't have the speed to make up for his slips. Yeah, it's unfortunate. He had a really good 2023. As soon as he was traded over, he was playing like a true CB1, just the breaks he was making on the ball, the impact, the physicality, the run fits. I would love to welcome him back like as a CB3 and then have like a CB in round 1 or round 2 to be your starter. And then you're looking at a top 4 of Benford, rookie corner, Douglas, Dane Jackson. Like that gives you a high floor and high ceiling combination. And I think he can really do a lot for like the group as a whole in terms of the mindset and the mentality you needed. But yeah, I just don't think he has the wheels right now or the juice. Or maybe he had some injury last year that we weren't privy to. But yeah, he didn't look like the same guy in 2024 that he did in 2023. And the Bills felt it on the back end, especially with those underneath routes. Like he was so good at kind of sitting at depth and waiting and triggering and getting interceptions and breaking on the ball and driving and getting PBUs and hitting guys. And we just didn't see that with regularity from him in 2024. Oh, John says, I don't mind moving up using our 4th through 6th round picks to get there. Our first 3 picks, 1st and 2 2nd rounds, need to get us a CB, DT, and edge. I don't disagree. Give me a corner, a defensive tackle, and an edge in the first 3 picks for the Bills. I move too much when I do these shows. It makes my camera refocus sometimes. NDL says, Darian Porter. Thoughts of Darian Porter, corner from Iowa State. Let me pull up my evaluation notes. Good spatial awareness in zone, able to drop, able to space routes accordingly in spot drop, regular zone coverage. A press man corner, susceptible to underneath routes and in breakers. His feet tend to get crossed up and or stuck which will leave him, to get caught lunging. His feet and hands get out of sync more than you would like. He's a willing force player and a willing tackler, willing to come up and play the run, but his lankiness and frame makes him a bit movable and susceptible to broken tackles. Good eyes, good processing. Someone that I wouldn't be opposed to the Bills targeting in round 2. I have more of a kind of or like a second to third round grade on him, but without the Bills having a third, I wouldn't be opposed. I don't love him, but I'm fine with him kind of coming in and battling and going from there. John Roberts says, what's your opinion on Maxwell Hairston? I like Maxwell Hairston. There is maybe some off the field stuff that I think might take him off the Bills board, but I'll read my evaluation because it's right here too. Calm and clean feet, plus recovery speed, plus athleticism, a willing but poor tackler. Angles and decisions are a bit questionable in run support, and especially as far as a fit and force player, but the willingness is there, and you will see him make some good tackles from time to time. Recovery speed and feet allow him to get back in phase when fooled versus routes. Athleticism and speed, again, are a plus. Good short area burst, able to play both the left and right side, able to collect routes in zone coverage, also good zone spatial awareness, able to fall off routes, able to bait quarterbacks. Will let wide receivers into his blind spot from time to time, but the recovery speed and athleticism may allow him to recover even at an NFL level because that speed from an on-tape perspective and time perspective is very real. Able to play cover 2, cover 3, straight up man coverage, press man, physical, smaller frame, stature will limit him a bit at the catch point at times and at the tackle point, but overall an explosive athletic corner. Ron says Amos in the first and Quincy Riley from Louisville later in the draft. Yeah, Riley's one that keeps popping up for me again. He's in. I will be finishing all. For those who don't know, April is my I finish my prospect evaluations for each group to really get to about 10 to 15 guys deep at every position as much as I can. So I'm really solidifying everything going forward. This is great from RJ. RJ says, so what corner will fit the Bills best? And when does KC trade up in front of us to grab them? I'll tell you, man, and you know this, and so many people know this about me with how much I loved Trent McDuffie and how much I pounded the table for him. If the Chiefs trade up and take Trey Amos, that might be it for me as a football person. I'm out. I'm done. I don't know where I would go in the world, but I would be in a bad way. I can't even verbalize how much that would jack me up mentally and emotionally. Sal says, if we continue the same schemes, nothing will change. McDermott is a rocket. I don't think he's necessarily a rocket. I think he's got, for all intents and purposes, on the whole, Bills winning percentage, their advanced metrics, their just regular win-loss record year over year, where they go in the playoffs, they've had success. So I understand him not completely revamping or revolutionizing, what's worked for him. But I do think there are some tweaks. They made some in the past. I'm interested to see what they will do this year, given the breadcrumbs we've seen drop from him, the coaching staff changes, and some of the things that myself and Eric have been told in our film room episodes with Greg Rousseau, with Terrell Bernard, some of those interesting nuggets. Pete says, there's guys worth trading up for. Locking into using those first 3 picks on 3 different players doesn't mean we're getting impactful snaps. Look at the uncertainty with Bishop even a year in. Very fair point. That's my biggest detractor when it comes to trading up in the draft, because it is such a crapshoot. Like I mentioned earlier, no surefire thing is a surefire thing. So I prefer as many swings at the plate as possible. And if you sacrifice draft capital to move up, in theory, you're moving up for more of a surefire guy, but that surefire guy still may not work out. So you're sacrificing capital for something that is still unsure, even though it has more probability of being sure. I think that's very fair. Paisan says, do you think there's any chance Daquan Hardy could improve and crack the roster finally? He did show promise in the preseason, like you mentioned, but they cut him and then welcomed him back. I don't know. Charles says AZ Thomas might be the most boom bust. The traits are crazy, and he's one of the youngest CBs. There's some things to like there for sure. Pete says he'd move up for a CB or defensive lineman. There's guys who can be our CB2 available at 56 or 62. Ideally, stay put, but that's too prudent sometimes. I would prefer corner in round 1, mainly because of Amos. Because the interior defensive lineman that I think will be available at where the Bills pick in round 2, I like those guys better than the corners that I think will be available there. but I think this is a fair point. I don't hate it completely. Oh, Paisan says, also random question, but prime Trey White versus Benford right now, who is better? Prime Trey White. No disrespect to Benford. Prime Trey White was lockdown, and an all-pro. Prime Trey White. What else? What else? Bills are electric, saying Maxwell had a really good Senior Bowl. Yeah, I didn't go to the Senior Bowl this year. I also responded to you on Twitter when you asked me some stuff about Jonas Sanker. Yeah, I didn't go to the Senior Bowl this year, and I paid attention to some of it, but I wasn't completely locked in. Part because I was emotional that I wasn't there. Noah says he wants a Jair Alexander type corner that trash talks in his ball hawk. Yeah, it's a different kind of mentality with guys like Jair. Okay. Just the Tippy News says, one day in the very distant future, if we are allowed to clone human beings, it will make for great roster building. That's a very fair point. That's really what the Bills should be doing. They should be investing in clone-based technology so they could just clone Christian Benford, and you don't need to worry about CB2. You just clone Christian Benford, boom, you're good to go. This is a great comment from Rockpile, who I'm guessing I know who it came from on Rockpile, and I hope someone from the chat gets it. So the comment is, so we have a 141 2/3 chance of getting a DB or getting a CB and defensive lineman with our first 2 picks? ? That's some good Steiner math right there. I like that. Well done. Yeah, so good conversation piece on the corner aspect. And again, what they gravitated towards in the past, guys like Dane Jackson, guys like Levi Wallace, it could be a little less of that. It doesn't have to be full scale, full tilt Kyer Elam. There was a happy medium. Just kind of split that difference a little bit. Ish Will says, wow, how quickly they forget Trey White. Man, not only an all-pro, but had that clutch it factor. Always came up big when you needed him. Man, he was, prime Trey White. The feet, the hand usage, the ability to stay in phase, the zone coverage, how he could process and read, react, fall off, bait, collect. Man, yeah. Prime Trey White was sweet. You know what? And he did, on the Trey White aspect, he had some good reps for Baltimore last year. I thought he was going to get more burn down the stretch, especially with Brandon Stevens struggling, but they would use him and kind of mix him in every once in a while as like their third CB and do some different stuff. He had some fun reps for Baltimore. I'm still pulling for him. Good dude, and was a really good player when he was here. Just unfortunate with the injuries, but we'll kind of see. All right, let's go to the interior defensive line. I think this one is the most, not necessarily straightforward, but the straightforward from my perspective, but I think the most muddy when you juxtapose what fans want versus what they have traditionally done. And I like that. Just the Tippy News says 11 Terrell Bernards, and then Noah Sheldon says, get Taron Johnson an evil clone and play him at CB2. I like that. The Bills archetype at interior defensive line, I think, is so important to talk about with what a lot of the fan base wants at interior defensive line. So much of, and maybe I'm seeing this wrong, and maybe it just happens to be what I continue to see or hear about on social and even in real life, but the idea for that, bigger bodied one tech, that true one tech, I just don't think it's something that they're necessarily going to go for. Okay, the example I kind of want to use, like Tavondre Sweat, who I liked last year coming out of Texas. And man, he had a great rookie year. It helps to play next to Jeffrey Simmons. But that type of one tech, that literal bigger bodied space eater, people eater on the interior, is not traditionally who they gravitate towards. Their one techs are usually, from a size perspective, somewhere between like 310 to 315 maybe. But it's all about playing with strength. Oh, Ron says trade for Simmons. God, I would give up so much for Jeffrey Simmons. Their interior defensive line, from a one-tech perspective, you need to have that play strength, but they don't gravitate towards the size. Part of the reason they don't gravitate towards the size, and this is, again, all part of like the larger conversation, they want guys that can affect the quarterback in addition to playing the run. And if they had to pick which one they would have and sacrifice the other, they'll sacrifice some of the run defense stuff for somebody who can rush the passer. And if just some examples to kind of further that in that conversation piece, right? They struggled last year with the run. We saw guys getting displaced on the interior. Defensive tackles were getting blown off the ball, whether it was Dwayne Carter, Austin Johnson, Jordan Phillips. Quentin Jefferson didn't play a ton against the run, but you saw what happened with him. They had Elianku sitting on the practice squad, who is an absolute tank to move, who does not get displaced, who can solidify your run game a little bit, right? Your run defense game a little bit, I should say. Doesn't really offer a lot as a pass rusher. And we saw him not get called up, despite them playing run-based teams, despite guys getting blown off the ball, despite having questions about the spine of the defense, and again, displacement, guys being knocked over gaps, getting blown 2, 3, 4, 5 yards downfield off the ball. They still kind of left Elianku chilling there. Even Charles in the comments says Poona Ford. Poona Ford the year before. Poona Ford is a little bit different from the archetype conversation. I just don't get why he played. They opted to bring in Linval Joseph, who is more of a true plugger and space eater, but he just didn't play great because he didn't have any legs left based on where he was in his career. And good comment here from Ron saying when you have small linebackers, you need your defensive tackles to hold up. Absolutely spot on, Ron. So Poona, I think, is a little bit different with the archetype conversation. I think Poona was more that they just didn't like the person, not necessarily the scheme fit. Because again, they went and they grabbed Linval Joseph, who was like Poona Ford times, I don't know, 1,000 with how much bigger he was and even less pass rush juice than Poona. I just would have played Poona over a lot of the other guys they were playing once Daquan went down. Like his flashes were legit to me, and I liked them a lot. I still don't get why they didn't play him. And then you saw the success that he had with the Chargers, and he got paid by the Rams. He goes to a Rams front now. What, good for him. He should be able to, especially with their multiplicity, it'll fit his game a little bit more. Pete says, I find the one tech conversation deeply upsetting. You don't have to be 330 pounds to stop the run well. And this is, again, part of that conversation. I think a lot of fans want the space eater, the big body, because they think that's what it takes to stop the run, to withstand double teams. And that's not necessarily true. Daquan Jones is a really good example, right? Daquan Jones, when he came to the Bills, he slimmed down. He shed weight to play at one tech between 307 and 310 pounds. And when he was cooking as that one tech, a guy who could just club dudes out of the way, throw guys out of the club inside, anchor against double teams, drop the knee. So you don't have to be 320, 325, 330 pounds to be an effective one tech. So that's first and foremost. You don't have to be huge to be able to impact the run. The second part of that, the bigger you are, in theory, certain body types and frames, the larger they are, do tend to help being able to withstand the run. But that being said, again, going back to point one, you don't have to be Vita Vea to hold up against the run. If you are, awesome, but you don't have to be that guy, right? Part three of that is, even if you are that huge plugger, the Bills have not gravitated towards that on the interior. Linval Joseph, I think, is the biggest outlier of all of them. He didn't really have any pass rush juice left. It was pure plugger aspect versus the run. I still don't get he didn't have any legs left, and him playing over Poona, larger conversation, but he is the outlier from a size perspective. He kind of fit that bigger body, like, oh, this is what we want, a plugger on the inside. Jordan Phillips, I know, is very huge, kind of fits that from a size perspective, but from a play style perspective, he's a pass rusher, not a plugger, not anchoring against double teams, not dropping the knee, that kind of guy. That is also, I think, a very good conversation point to go back to Pete's point of saying you don't have to be 330 pounds to stop the run well. Jordan Phillips was built like the plugger a lot of fans want, but his play style wasn't that type of play style. It comes down to how you play the game. So I don't think you need someone who's 320, 325, 330 as your one tech, right? And aside from that, I don't think the Bills believe that's what they want at one tech. They want someone who can, if you can anchor against the run, cool. If you can split double teams, cool. But you need to be able to have an impact as a pass rusher. The two prototypical examples I think that fit what the Bills want at a one tech or defensive tackle in this draft early, I'll say, Derek Harmon from Oregon and Darius Alexander from Toledo. The pass rush juice, the size, the frame, guys that still have enough to penetrate and one gap and get upfield and rush the quarterback, but can also maintain responsibility against the run, can anchor a double team, can play with some core strength, can drop the knee, can gum up the works, cannot get displaced, or I should say limit how much they get displaced versus the run. That's what the Bills want on their interior in general. Guys that can just limit displacement, but also impact the quarterback. Another example of this, not only did Daquan shed weight when he came to Buffalo, but you take Austin Johnson, who was a pure one-tech for the most part with the Giants a couple seasons ago, plays in a similar big body mold with the Chargers, comes to the Bills. He trimmed down to come to the Bills. And him and Dwayne Carter are kind of rotating between one tech and three tech. That's what they view for that type of spot. Larry Ogunjobi, who they just signed as free agent, right? I think he's built more to be a three tech. He's going to see some snaps at one tech because they value penetration and disruption and habit creation. And if that means he gets blown off the ball from time to time against double teams, which will happen to him, they're cool living in that mold and in that world. That's what they value at their archetype on the interior. Now, a couple things. Again, I mentioned it, and I think someone mentioned it in the chat, and I forgot who did, so I apologize for not bringing it up and not starring it. But just with some of the things that we've been told, myself and Eric in the film room, speaking with Terrell Bernard, speaking with Greg Rousseau, I do think there's a chance for them to go for more of a run-skewed one-tech or run-skewed defensive tackle. Again, if I had to put like a percentage on it, I think their interior guys, especially from the rotational perspective, I think they go like 65-35 pass rush. I think there's a chance that maybe they go 60-40 pass rush, maybe 55-45 pass rush, maybe even 55-45 run defense. I think there's a chance just with what they need defensively, what we all know they need defensively, and what Bernard and Rousseau said to us in the film room episodes. And if you haven't seen those, go check those out. Not even doing a shameless plug. There's a ton of really great insight from those guys and some tape that we broke down with them. And I say all this to say they need guys on the interior that can limit displacement and not get blown off the ball horizontally or downfield. That is what this Bills defense needs. They play a lot of light boxes. They play two high safety structures. They play a nickel defense, and their linebackers are smaller. You do not want you don't want your second level defenders in Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano, and Taron Johnson having to deal with guards and centers and tackles getting to the second level and causing problems for them. Then they're not doing a lot of stack and shed. They're going to have to dip and rip and get around, which means you have to move with anticipation. You have to trigger quickly and accurately, but then also there's a chance you kind of get bumped out of a gap a little bit, and that can create more problems inside. With the issues they had with yards before contact as a light box, yards after contact as a light box, you need someone on the interior who has the capability to anchor and hold their ground against double teams and against the run. But you still need to be able to penetrate a little bit for the Bills. That's what they believe. And I also believe that too, right? I don't think you can just be, as all jokes aside, and people mentioned him in the chat, like Ted Washington, warms my heart. Little Anthony, me love Ted Washington and love Pat Williams and what they would do and just eat up space in the middle. Those guys aren't rocking today because they're not really offering you anything as a pass rush, right? So now I say all that to say Derek Harmon fits there, right? Darius Alexander fits there. Someone who I love in this draft, but I don't think fits, Tyleik Williams, the defensive tackle from Ohio State. And I say I don't know, or I don't think he fits. He's more of a two-down player. I think he's more athletic than he gets credit for. And he can push the pocket because he has some juice. He has some explosion, but he's not a penetrator. He's not a one-gapper. He's not this guy that on the snap is going to have these moves and be able to get forward. He's going to try and, because he has some lateral explosion, he might step and give you a quick club or a swim or an arm over or get by a guy. But he's probably just trying to drive linemen back into the quarterback's lap. I am willing to take that because I think he's a plus defender against the run. His ability to diagnose blocking schemes, recognize what's coming at him, being able to drop the knee against double teams. He can anchor against the double. He can drop the knee against the double. He can club somebody and throw him to the ground. He can stack and shed and read a running back's track and make a play in the hole. And I do think he has more athleticism that he gets credit for. Now, within all that, and see, this is a good one too. Charles says Alfred Collins would also seem like a traditional non-fit. Alfred Collins is a great example. I really, really, really like Alfred Collins as a run defender. Good recognition, great hand usage, textbook stack and shed. Good pad level. Tyleik Williams has really good pad level as well. But Alfred Collins, get into somebody, great hand placement, gets hands, gets control, is just waiting for the running back to decide where to go, chucking dudes down to the ground, makes a play. Alfred Collins gives you nothing as a pass rusher. He has this spin move where he spins in place. He doesn't go anywhere. He falls down a lot with it. There's nothing from a pass rush perspective for Alfred Collins. Now, there could be maybe at some point, but there's nothing really to see right now. I've watched so much Texas tape watching Collins and Makuba and Barron and Vernon Broughton and a lot of dudes on their defense. I've seen so many Texas games, and I think I could probably count on one hand the amount of like good pass rush snaps from Alfred Collins. So he's even more skewed in that regard. I personally still wouldn't mind taking him in round 2 because I like the idea of Daquan and Ed and Ogunjobi and Alfred Collins as a rotational guy. I would prefer somebody higher tier because I think Daquan Jones is more suited for a rotational role now than a true starter, but conversation for another time. But yeah, Collins is even more in that regard. The guys that they're looking for are, again, being able to live in the light and the dark. One gap, penetrate, get upfield, be able to impact the quarterback and impact the run. Collins is in that mold. Tyreek Williams is a little more in that mold than Collins, but he's not Harmon. He's not Alexander, like those type of dudes. And for those who might think like, oh, like Harmon's more of a 3-tech or Alexander's more of a 3-tech. I think they both can play both, but I do think the Bills would view them as a 1-tech based on their size and be based on their previous archetype profiles and traditionally how they've operated. And Paisan says they were interested in Lakey Fotu. Yes, they were. And that's what I think is most interesting. He doesn't give you anything from a pass rush perspective. He doesn't give you any of that pass rush upside. The fact that they were interested in him, again, it could just be a camp body, could be the bottom tier depth chart guy to battle and need some snaps in the preseason. I do think there's a little more smoke and potentially more fire to it than that. So it gives me hope that they could go for someone who is more skewed towards run defense and not just more pass rush than he is run defense. Ron says, have you watched Jordan Phillips? He's only 20 years old and moves pretty well. I have not. Defensive tackle from Maryland. He's in my final tier of dudes to wrap up interior defensive line. I've watched so many in a multitude of other ways, but when I have the interior defensive line conversation, which will be several weeks from now, I don't remember which date and what I'm doing where, but yeah, I will have notes and film and lots of things on Jordan Phillips. He will definitely be watched for me. Where? Todd says Harmon has a low tackle percentage, doesn't he? I don't know what Harmon's tackle percentage is, but my biggest issue with Harmon is he's more of a disruptor than he is finisher. A lot of pressures. You'd like to get more sacks. I think you see some of the change of direction stuff. He's great at getting upfield, but then having to break down his base, how he's built, sometimes will kind of mislead him at the tackle point or the sack point, I should say. So I think he's more disruptor than finisher, but from how he's built from a frame perspective and skill set and play style, he fits what the Bills want on the interior in general, even again, as a 1-tech type of guy. RJ, don't be this dramatic. RJ says Bean will draft a 250-pound defensive tackle and put him at 1-tech because, of course, they will. That's too far. Maybe like 255. I'm just kidding. No, that's too far, but that's fair. RJ, I expect that comment from you at this point. Let me go. I wanted to speak on this a little bit. Jared says Kenneth Grant would be the only defensive tackle I would take in the first round. If he's gone, no problem, because there's plenty of talent in the second. And John Roberts says Kenneth Grant, a plugger. I spoke on him a little bit last week. I just want to speak on him now because I know so many folks are asking about him. I'm not as high on Kenneth Grant as others are. The easiest way I can describe him is I think he's a big man and an athletic guy. I think he plays more to the athletic side than he does the big side. I think he plays, for being listed at 330 pounds, he plays like he's 305 or 310 at best. He plays like he wants to get upfield and rush the QB, not necessarily anchor, handle double teams, recognizing blocking schemes, do the run defense stuff that you would think he would do because of his size, or you may want him to. Again, the flashes are there. The athleticism shows on tape. Didn't have a great testing day at his pro day, which kind of gives you some concern about the athleticism. But I'm just a little down on him, especially in relative comparison to others who are very high on what defensive tackle 2 or like want him as a lock for the Bills at 30. I would take him. I'd welcome him. I wouldn't be overjoyed with it at 30. I don't think he doesn't do enough for me as a run defender and also doesn't do enough for me as a pass rusher. But there are some traits there and you could continue to build and he could develop. But I think when he's doing pass rush, if he's not winning on the snap with a quick, his go-to move on the interior when he wins is a pass rusher. He'll get some, bull rush and kind of drive a guy back, but it's usually a sidestep and then some lateral explosion and a quick swim or arm over back inside. If he's not winning with that, he's stalling out a lot of times, or he's doing moves almost for the sake of doing moves. It's kind of like somebody who's playing a video game and is just button mashing and just mashing buttons to mash buttons. They're not doing this move to lead to this move to lead to that. They're just kind of trying to spam everything and hit what they can and see what works. And so it gives me some cause for concern. I think he's more developmental than he necessarily gets than finished product, I should say. Again, a big guy and an athletic guy, but I think he plays more to the athlete than he does the big. For a guy who's listed at 330 and plays in that range, I think he plays more like he thinks he's 305. He plays more as a one gap penetrating upfield type of defensive tackle than he does a displacement limiter. And I don't think he does enough as an upfield pass rushing, like one gap type of penetrating guy. So it's almost like he's this weird type of tweener, which again gives me some more pause. I have to finalize my interior defensive line rankings. But yeah, it's I don't love him as much as others do. I have some cause for concern. I wouldn't be, distraught if they took him, but I don't think he's this slam dunk, home run, lock, amazing pick and fit like a lot of folks think that he may be. But again, that's just me. Teach their own. A lot of comments here. Ron says Tyleik Williams would be a good get in the second round. Man, if you could guarantee me right now, if you could tell me the Bills could get Trey Amos at 30 and Tyleik Williams at 56 or 62 or whatever it is, I would sign up for that every single day of the week. Every single day of the week, I would sign up for that. I would take it immediately. I really like Tyleik Williams. Again, I think he offers more from an athlete perspective. Again, he's not some plus athlete. He's not a plus pass rusher, but he has enough juice and power to impact the pocket. And that's enough for me, considering what he does against the run, especially for this defense. John Roberts says, how is Deone Walker, defensive tackle from Kentucky? I didn't like his tape. The movement is really poor just with how he's built. But I do know that he had a back injury last year, and maybe that impacted him a bit. So I have to go back and watch some 2023 tape and see maybe if there was a significant difference there. As of right now, I'm low on him, and I also don't see him being a scheme fit for the Bills. Pete says, I don't see it, but I would go to a dark place if Harmon gets to 30 and we don't take him. Yeah, I to your point, I don't see Harmon lasting till 30. I don't think Harmon or Barron last till 30 from a defensive tackle or cornerback perspective, respectively. What else? Sal says, watch the replay of the Ravens playoffs. They ran the ball down our throat the whole third quarter. That's a good point. I think it's an aspect that gets lost in these Bills playoffs. Like that second half, Baltimore ran the ball down the Bills' throat with regularity. And when push came to shove at the end, Lamar Jackson marched them down the field and was ready to tie the game up if not for that drop. And even with that game in general, not to get too far off track, I know the Bills forced some of those turnovers, right? The pressure that heated up Lamar that made him throw that deep ball that Taylor Rapp picked off, even somewhat of what DeMar Hamlin did to Lamar, but a lot of the Ravens really kind of shot themselves in their own foot. The Mark Andrews fumble, several of the drops, even the Lamar fumble to a degree. But aside from the turnovers, and you can't do this because there was 3 of them, but aside from those turnovers where Baltimore kind of shot themselves in the foot a bit, they moved the ball up and down the field at will on the Bills. And then again, when push came to shove in the second half, it was just, we're just going to run the ball down your throat and up the gut, and there's nothing you can do about it. And they couldn't do anything about it. And I think that's very worrisome. Again, the yards before contact speak to a degree from a light box perspective or from the defense in general. I think they showed up good in shorter down and distances in big times when it mattered, like 3rd and 1 or 4th and short, that kind of stuff. But that was because they were able to gap out. They would have to commit numbers to the box and be able to win with numbers. They weren't winning individually. They weren't winning with guys who were stealing gaps or beating guys individually against the run, aside from like Rousseau and Epinesa. Yeah, especially on the interior, especially from a rotational perspective, they were just getting driven off the ball left and right. All right. Charles says lots of shifts to rushing from offenses last year. Does that impact the Bills going for someone that's not the traditional type? They don't really have the horses to stop teams like the Ravens. That's an A-plus question, Charles. My answer is, for you saying, does that impact the Bills going for someone that's not the traditional type? My answer is, I hope so. My second answer is, we'll see. My third answer is, I really hope so. To your point, the run game is coming back in vogue. It's not just a couple teams that lean into it here and there. It's going to matter. And gap scheme runs in particular matter. So you need guys. It's not just about being athletic enough to not get reached or not have an offensive lineman cross your face. And it's like, okay, you can shoot this gap or you can cut this off from the backside. Now it's, can you hold your ground against a guy down blocking you? Can you hold your ground against a double team? Can you come up field and recognize that a guard just left your gap and you not thinking, oh, I'm free, because it's actually trap. And now you're going to get slammed in your ear by the guard coming from the other side. Or it's wham, and you came upfield and there's a tight end or a fullback or an H-back who's going to spear you in the other ear and drive you out of the hole. Like, there needs to be more emphasis on run defense, especially with the Bills and how they're built defensively. And again, all of it ties into limiting what the pass game can do. You want numbers in coverage. So you want to be able to defend the run for light box. That is from a light box. That is the holy grail for a defense. If you can defend the run with a light box and have two high safety structures, you can have numbers in coverage. If you can keep numbers in coverage, and when I say numbers, like having 7 guys being able to drop, or, depending on what it is, who has to commit from the second level. But if you have numbers in coverage, if you have the numbers advantage against the pass, that's a very successful winning formula. But you can only do that if you can stop the run with less numbers. And in order to stop the run with less numbers, you need guys up front that can stop the run when they're outgunned. You need guys who can beat a double team or a guy who can steal a gap and make those plays against the run. So I do hope that it impacts the Bills going for someone that's not the traditional type. I do think they need more dirt and grit and sandpaper and violence on the inside from a run game perspective. Like, that's what they need. Robert says it's time to move on from Daquan Jones. Anthony, your defensive line philosophy scares me. You have to get a defensive line that stops the run. I don't disagree. Paisan says re-sign Jordan Phillips, then draft Jordan Phillips and recreate this Spider-Man meme. Ron says, I think they can fix some of Harmon's issues and get a lot out of him. I'll tell you this too, right? For Harmon being a penetrator guy and Ed Oliver also being like a penetrator type of guy and Ogunjobi being that type of guy, right? Building your interior like that, it helps when you have guys on the outside who can compress the pocket and clean things up. So I don't know, having an edge like Greg Rousseau with crazy length who can clean things up a little bit, having an edge like Joey Bosa who's great at reading quarterback angles and depths of their drop and being able to adjust his rush angle or go through offensive tackles to put them into that drop, that helps a little bit. Having guys who can play the edge spots cerebrally, I think helps a little bit. Having a guy like Michael Hoyt, again, who can stunt and dip and do all these different kinds of things, it kind of balances out a little and helps a bit. I do wish Harmon finished more, but I will take a disruptor, and he does play the run, which helps. And he's also a really great character guy from what I've heard from people, so that's a good piece as well. Luke says, do you lock in an edge at pick 30 if it's Green from Marshall or Shamar Stewart from A&M? I haven't watched Mike Green yet. I haven't watched Shamar Stewart yet. I'm still finishing my stuff on the Texas A&M boys, both him and Nick Scorton. Green for me, and part of the reason I got to him like later, I just think he's such an outlier for what the Bills like at edge. And I'm going to talk about it in a minute. His size and his play style is an outlier. And I'm going to juxtapose it with a guy that fits kind of what they've done from an archetype perspective. Oh, Ron says, if Stewart is there at 30, I'm absolutely gambling on the trades. Fair point. Ron says there's going to be some really good DTs still available in the 3rd and even 4th round. That's fair. Jared says, I won't be happy if I stay up late for us to trade out of the 1st round again. Oh, man. Oh. Ron says, let's get Dwayne Carter to add 20 pounds of muscle. Maybe he won't get blown into the stands on almost every running play. I don't think it's just the muscle. It's his play style. I'm going to keep saying it all offseason. I'm not out on Dwayne Carter, but I'm kind of out on Dwayne Carter. Like, I think right now, he should be like defensive tackle 4 or ideally defensive tackle 5. Like, I think they need an interior, like I said last week, they need an interior defensive lineman that can either bump Daquan Jones to a rotational role with Ogunjobi, or they need another high-end rotational guy. So you've got Ed, Daquan, Ogunjobi, and the rotational guy, and then Dwayne Carter's 5. Like, he just got to prove something. And it has nothing to do with the injury. Like people like to say, like, oh, before the wrist injury, he was playing good. No, he wasn't. He had some positive flashes against Houston. That was it, unfortunately. Good conversation. Let's move on to the next position of need, edge. So that comment that I just read a minute ago regarding Mike Green from Marshall, from a perspective, or from that perspective, the Bills' archetype at edge, if there was one edge that could fall to them at pick 30, that I think the Bills would run to the podium and draft, it would be Mykel Williams from Georgia. The length, the strength, the pocket compression, the ability to play the run, all of that in a package is what the Bills want at edge. That is what they have gravitated towards in the past. Von Miller was an outlier. Javon Solomon was an outlier. Now, what's interesting with that is those are moves in the past several years, right? Does that indicate they're starting to tweak things a little bit? Even Bosa is more of a move back towards pocket compression. That's been the biggest thing for them. From a pass rush perspective, they want pocket compressors. They're not completely into dip and bend and athleticism and moves. They want pocket compression guys. They want you to use a long arm. They want you to bull rush or speed to power, but it's the power piece that matters. They want you to compress the pocket all around a quarterback. They don't want dip and bend and run the arc. They're not looking for spin moves and all that creativity. They want pocket compressors. Mykel Williams from Georgia is the archetype in this draft of what they gravitate towards. Again, it's like Ron says there, we like length at defensive end. That is absolutely right. And Luke says, although I love the idea of Mike Green, I'd absolutely take Mykel Williams as well. I'm excited to see Green's tape. I've heard there's some really great stuff from a pass rush perspective and like an athleticism and flash perspective. I've also heard he gives great effort against the run, so I'm excited to see him. Oh, why do I think he has some off the field stuff in some way? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's somebody else. But yeah, I'm excited to watch Green's tape. But yeah, he's Luke says I'd absolutely take Mykel Williams as well. Mykel Williams is the poster boy for what the Bills want at edge. Mykel Williams is another Greg Rousseau. That's what the Bills want at edge. They want pocket compressors. Boom, done and dusted. That's it. Now, what I think is interesting, again, so Luke and Joe both said he does. If someone wants to put into the chat, because I don't remember, and somebody told me and I don't remember, what does Mike Green have? Yeah, and Claudia even says Green will be off the Bills board. I thought it was something early in his college career, but I don't remember. Feel free to put it in the chat because I don't remember anybody. I appreciate the detective work in the chat. Claude says, just happened upon Elijah Roberts from SMU. I have not watched Elijah Roberts yet. I know Russell Brown, who will be joining me in a couple weeks. I know he likes Elijah Roberts, but he's in the next type of thing. Oh, okay. Oh, copy that. Pete says we shouldn't type Green's thing, and Ron followed up with what? Okay, fair enough. Then that makes me not want to watch the tape because I don't want to watch that guy. But yeah, fair enough. But so again, from a positive perspective, Mykel Williams. If you need to wonder what the Bills' archetype is at edge, it is Mykel Williams. It is Greg Rousseau. They want pocket compressors. Now, again, similar to the defensive tackle piece, it doesn't have to be the biggest guy. You don't have to have all this size and length. They prefer length. That is something that they genuinely want. And even as I go to look at something for Javon Solomon right now, for as small as Javon Solomon was, right? Like smaller height, lower weight, 6 feet, 7/8 inches for height, 246 pounds for weight. From a percentile standpoint, that height is literally the 0 percentile for height. His weight, he's in the 8th percentile. So he's a smaller dude. But his arm length at 33 7/8 inches puts him in the 63rd percentile, which, again, isn't crazy for, Ron says he has Spider-Man arms. Yeah, but for a guy like, 63rd percentile, that's good length. Having 33 and 7/8 inches arms for a guy who's 6 feet, 246, those are long arms. That's what the Bills like. They like arm length and they like pocket compression. So even though Solomon was an outlier from an overall size, height, and weight perspective, and even from a stylistic perspective, Solomon wasn't really a pocket compression guy. He had some dip, he had some bend. He won with moves and plan and rush repertoire and move transitions. He was a bit of an outlier stylistically and height and weight wise, but he ticked that big box for arm length. So they value arm length, they value pocket compression. Now, again, like I mentioned in the kind of lead into this segment, are they starting to tweak that a little bit? I think that's very interesting to kind of see. And I'm interested to see what kind of edge they gravitate towards based off of that. Because there's a lot of depth at defensive line in this draft on the interior and at edge. But if you're ranking them based on like archetype fit for the Bills, you have to put it within the style and the arm length. And overall, the same size kind of plays into it a bit as well, right? But can you get somebody who has the arm length and the style that fits what the Bills want? Or are they moving away towards that? Do they want more dip or bend or edge or actually, yeah, dip or bend at the edge? Are they looking for, and I know there's some like attitude stuff with James Pierce, like, but would they consider somebody like James Pierce if he's there, or even Donovan Ezeraku? He's got the arm length, but he's more of a dip, bend, moves guy, right? Beautiful ghost like type of guy off the edge where he can flash and dip underneath. A tackle is throwing their hands for a punch. He's dipping and going underneath them, flattening, getting to the quarterback. He's not necessarily a compression guy, right? Isn't, can defend the run, but is more of just a mercenary and a hunter off the edge right now. Do they look towards somebody like that, especially early on? Or is it more like, hey, we want Landon Jackson. Hey, we want JTT from Ohio State. Or is it, hey, Jack Sawyer's got a great motor and plays the run, but he's got short arms. Do they where do they buck and where do they not? Edge, I think, is really interesting because I just think they've been bit by mobile quarterbacks a bit too much on the edge because they've gravitated more towards pocket compression guys and guys who play the run. And I do think you need that, especially again, with the advent of similar to the interior defensive line conversation. At edge, you need guys who can play the run. You need guys who are stout, who can hone their craft against the run, control their gap, maybe play some gap and a half, maybe two gap. Actually, not even maybe. You do need the two gap and a half at times if you're going to play with those light boxes, right? But that pass rush aspect, just overall in the room, they need more athleticism. They need more juice. They need more moves. Do they think that? Are Vaughn and Javon Solomon breadcrumbs that lead to something else? Or are they looking more towards that archetype? I will say, for as much as I want juice and dip and athleticism and bend, if Mykel Williams was sitting there at 30, I'll take Mykel Williams. Like, I don't know how he played with this year with the ankle injury that he had against Clemson. I said it on last week's show. I thought his ankle was broken immediately in that opening game against Clemson. And he played the whole rest of the year. His numbers were down. His effectiveness was down because he was essentially playing on one leg. But even with that, you're watching him just chuck dudes and play with leverage and length and what he does when healthy. Coming into this past season, in the 2024 season, he was viewed as like a top 5 lock and arguably like the best prospect in this class in a multitude of ways. And then he got banged up. Abdul Carter just rose like the Undertaker sitting up out of the casket or in the center of the ring and took over everything from an edge perspective. But Mykel Williams is a dude. If he were to fall, I got no problem with the Bills taking him, just what he offers and how he fits what they're trying to do. Again, I would still like dip and bend and athleticism, but I think he's just a good football player and can affect the quarterback in a multitude of ways from a compression standpoint, given the juice they have on the inside and then what he offers as a run defender. Him and Groot, man, just what Mykel Williams and Groot would offer you from a light box run defense perspective, that's part of it too. Like the run defense just can't get lost for me. But again, that's the archetype of what they want at edge, right? And so that's what makes the conversation so interesting and fun with a lot of the names for people. Is it like, okay, like would Josiah Stewart be there. Oh, I see some in the chat. I have not watched. I've seen some clips of David Walker. Haven't watched him and done the evaluation, but he will get done before we do the Edge episode um, of this guy's coverage coming up in. I don't know how many weeks. I have to look at the calendar. Okay, I keep forgetting everything. But yeah, would they look towards someone like a Mike Green? Do they look at the traits of someone like Shamar Stewart? Do they gravitate towards the athleticism and the bend and the pass rush prowess of Donovan Ezeraku? Or is it more like, no, we want Landon Jackson. We want JTT. Could it be Princely Umami Yellen? Is that enough, that combination of athleticism and compression, or is that not enough? Like, all these questions that I think we have to ask about the edge position that are tied to the archetypes that they've traditionally operated with and gravitated towards, but some little maybe outliers and breadcrumbs that they've had in other ways that might indicate that they're moving towards someone else or trying to round out the room a little bit. And then, of course, the backdrop of all of this is, do you think Javon Solomon can be a player? If he is he your athleticism and bend guy, right? And do they think they have enough? If not, do they want more because they still think that he's going to be factored in the rotation, or is he not? And then you have Michael Hoyt. How are they going to use Hoyt? Are they going to use him as a traditional like four down edge, or are they going to use him all over the place like the Rams did, which I think they should, and which was very fun. But if they don't, he's violence and compression and has some moves off the edge. He's kind of like a tweener a little bit. It's interesting how they can change the edge grouping and the interior defensive line in just one draft class. It will be very interesting to see what they can do. And even the corner room as well, which is why I really wanted to talk about these three positions in this episode. They can, in one draft class, honestly, in the first 2 rounds, depending on if they say they take a corner, defensive tackle, and an edge at some combination in their first 3 picks, they really could go a long way towards significantly changing how they have viewed each position philosophically, stylistically, and from an archetype standpoint. Or they could stay the course. They could just look for what they've looked at, value responsibility and assignment sound and reliability at corner over everything else times 1,000. Value pocket compression at edge over everything else times 1,000. Value pass rush and penetration on the interior over everything times 1,000. Or they could tweak it a little bit. And I think the tweaks are potentially so interesting because they do have this MO at each of these positions. And there are guys in this class that they could take that are still good football players, but that fit that MO to a T perfectly and easily. There's also guys that could open them up schematically and help them evolve and adapt and tweak and move forward a little bit, given the day and age of this NFL and this nature. And yeah, Ron says it right here. Ron says, this draft is very exciting because they can make some serious adjustments on defense. I hope they do, because what we've been doing in the playoffs hasn't been working. And I think that's where it really comes down to. They've just been outgunned in the playoffs in a variety of ways. And I think that comes down to 2 things. I think it comes down to not having the horses on defense, not having the athleticism and the juice on defense, or just schematically not having it. But I think the schematic part is tied to not having the horses and being outgunned at that spot defensively. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can do schematically when you draft guys that operate in silos. If you don't have versatility within players, if you don't have versatility in skill set or traits or body type, there's only so many things you can do. You can't take certain guys and line them up all over the place because you're setting them up for failure. You can't operate and do all this fun, creative stuff schematically if you don't have the players that can operate in those creative spaces. If you have a guy who is an outside corner and is only an outside corner and can only work in zone, there's only so many things you can do. If you have an edge rusher that doesn't have good change of direction and can't do anything other than just rush the quarterback, and from a compression standpoint, there's only so many things you can do. They can do a lot to kind of, and I'm not even saying, I don't think even saying a lot is a dramatic statement. What they do in this draft at CB, edge, and interior defensive line could significantly lead to a schematic, I don't want to say change, because technically a tweak is a change, but I think change evokes more of like a wow, like a change type of thing to the defense. I don't think you're going to get that. I still think you are going to get what this defense has been from a schematic standpoint, but they need more variability, they need more variety, they need more multiplicity. And what the Bills could do with corner, edge, and interior defensive line in this draft could go a significantly long way towards more multiplicity and variability within this defense. Noah says, I want to hear Jim Nantz say Umami Ellen in the playoffs. Where? Pete says, piggybacking on Ron's comment, it's not CB2 that we're talking about on that, not downplaying that need. Our D line has been the hole. Yeah, but I think corner has also been an issue because of the athleticism standpoint and not having the horses. I mean, even again, some of it's been due to injury, right? 2 years ago against the Chiefs, Benford's out. Rasul Douglas is playing on one leg. The year before, they just, for whatever reason, how soft they were against the Bengals, or if it was the year before, everything kind of blends together for me a little bit. I think it's both. I think it's how they've been built in the secondary, plus the coverages that they've played, and how much the coverages are tied to the body types and skill sets and traits that they have in the secondary. And then also, I think it is the defensive line as well. I think it's been both. I think there's been a disconnect. There's been more of a divorce between the front and the back end than there has been a marriage. I think it's been both. I think, for as much as the defensive line has been the whole, and that's understandable, pass rush, run defense, all that type of stuff, I think there's been vulnerability in the secondary that hasn't been talked about as much because defensive line is more under the microscope. And even though we focus on corner a lot in this episode, I think safety is up there too. Like, who Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer were 2 seasons ago were not the Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer that helped put this Bills defense on the map. They need more athleticism at safety, which is also a need, which is why if Malachi Starks was there at 30, I'm still not opposed. Man, if Malachi Starks and Trey Amos were both there at 30, the conflict that I would have in my heart and soul and mind would be crazy intense. But yeah, I think it's been up front and on the back end, and I think they're tied to one another. But despite, CB2 being the biggest need for me, I do think the defensive line is, from an overall standpoint, been an issue, especially because you're rotating more bodies in. So that means you need more effectiveness from a multitude of guys up front. In theory, at corner, you just need 2 corners, right? Injuries obviously not coming into play, but in the defensive line, you need not just 4 starters, you need like 6 impact players on your defensive line. And the Bills have not had that. They haven't had anything close to that in the past several years in any way, shape, or form. Some have been injuries as well, but yeah, to your point. Oh, pizza's fair. I do put injuries in the back end more than personnel. That's fair. Each year I've never felt confident, like, even getting that game against the Bengals, even if it wasn't completely snowy and all the other like wonkiness with it, going into that game, again, maybe that's the extreme because Chase and Higgins are an unreal combo. But how are you covering Chase and T. Higgins? Even if and maybe the Super Bowl against Philly is another outlier, but how are you covering Devonta Smith and AJ Brown, and then also stopping the run, like against their O-line against Saquon Barkley, like that type of deal? And maybe those teams are outliers more than they are regularity with their 1-2 combo. And it's also weird because they've been able to kind of mitigate. Actually, you know what? But kind of put this in perspective, right? Like, they've been able to mitigate Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, which are a great 1-2 combo. But Miami has, when the games have been close, Miami's run all over the Bills every single time because the Bills put resources on the back end, but then they get outgunned up front. But part of the reason they get outgunned up front is because they have to commit more resources on the back end because they don't have the athleticism to stick with Waddle and Hill. Granted, not a lot of teams do, but it would be nice to have another guy back there who has athleticism or some man coverage capability or some press ability, disruption, airspace constrictor, restrictor, however you want to put it out there. Again, I think a lot of it is kind of chicken and egg, but I think it's fair to kind of see one more than the other. But, I kind of, Joe says, DT Al-Gaib. Listen, Al-Gaib. Claude says, I want Malachi Starks versus Amos. In fact, I want to leave this draft with Starks, Watts, or Makuba. Oh, man. Xavier Watts and Andrew Makuba. Fun stuff. Charles says, common denominator versus Mahomes has been pass rush, get the elite D-line. But you could also play the other card, right? If you have great secondary play, man up and send bodies at Mahomes. Get creative, blitz the hell out of him, make him get the ball out quickly, and try and force the lack of receiving talent that they've had at times to beat your corners. You can kind of play both. I do, again, either way, I think they need to upgrade. I think they need upgrades and tweaks from an archetype perspective and from a talent perspective on both the D line and the corner spot, like we've been talking about. Luke says, give me all the Texas boys, Barron, Makuba, and Bond. I have to finish. I have to get to the tape on Bond. I was super high on Bond coming out of Bama a couple of years ago, and then he went to Texas, and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be sweet," and we just didn't get it. This is Noah says, knowing being we will center on Hunter Wohler at safety. I tell you what, I haven't watched his tape in season. I watched a bunch of Wisconsin because I like Hunter Wohler. I don't think he has the athleticism, but that's a fair comment. But he does some fun stuff there. But maybe it's just me gravitating towards certain pieces of his game. Josh says Beam will go get his guy, and I think he wants a star at defensive line, whether that's edge or pass rushing interior defensive lineman. Fair. Josh also says, I do think CB2 is a huge need, but they could bring back Rasul for likely quote unquote cheap or try to upgrade and roll the dice with Asante Samuel Jr. I would take that every single day of the week. But I think if they get to 25-ish in round one, this might get interesting. I think that's fair to your point, Josh. And so a couple other people have echoed that here. Like, if someone, like if Barron fell to like 23, 24, or if Michael Williams is there like in the early to mid 20s, do they pull the trigger? Do they move up a little bit? I think that's interesting. Charles says tweener used to be a negative for guys. Now it's almost a plus to match up with offenses. Yes. You don't want to have too much variability. You don't want to take a guy like Isaiah Simmons from Clemson a couple years ago. It was like, oh man, he can be a safety and an off-ball linebacker and like a slot apex. Oh man, all this possibility. And it was like, no, he's just not fit for anything really. Granted, I don't think Arizona did him a lot of favors. It takes the right system and team to mold or hone a guy. But yes, I think you do need more variability. You need more tweener capability. It doesn't mean like a guy who's 50-50, just more guys that are 70-30. Or maybe some 80-20, not 95-5, like a lot of the Bills have been for their times. Joe says Billy Bowman will be awesome once he adds 3 to 4 inches to his height. He misses a crazy amount of tackles, but he plays at 1,000 miles an hour and plays with bad intentions. So part of me loves him and part of me also dislikes him. But that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Change the corner room a little bit. Change the defensive line a little bit. You have the opportunity to do all three of those, well, 2 of those things are what I just said, but all 3 at these 3 positions: corner, interior defensive line, and edge. And I think they're needed. Again, there are some guys who fit the archetype in this draft that they could go with, and it would be understandable and could still help. But I think if they buck some trends a little bit from what they've been traditionally or from an archetype standpoint, as we've had this conversation in this episode, I think it really could do them. I think it really could do them a lot of good. You know what else will do you a lot of good? One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. I don't say that because they sponsor the show. They sponsor the show because I think they are the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. Sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, a fantastic cheese to sauce ratio. They make their own homemade blue cheese. They also do catering options. They make an amazing buffalo mac and cheese, barbecue pulled pork mac and cheese. The regular mac and cheese is great. I really like mac and cheese, so it's right up my alley. That they do a lot of great stuff from a food perspective, and they do a lot of great stuff from a community perspective as well. What they do with partnering with Roswell to try to knock out cancer. They partner with the SPCA, their Toys for Tots drive every year, the Alzheimer's Foundation partnerships that they have. They do a lot of good for the community and the city of Buffalo and the towns and all of that, aside from just giving you tremendous food. So go out, get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Online menu can be found in the episode show notes, whether you're here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. They also have a pizza named after the Cover One brand. It is delicious. Get yourself some of that pizza or just whatever you want. If you want to get different toppings and things, if you get veggies and stuff, they chop them all up. They sprinkle them all over so you get an even amount of taste distribution in every bite. They really do some fantastic things. And Joe gets it. Joe says, tired EPA and DVOA, wired CTSR. And that means cheese to sauce ratio. That's what we're all about here on this show. Ron says, thanks, Ant. Now I'm hungry. I'm not going to lie. I had a bigger lunch and didn't really eat dinner. I got crazy hungry at like 8:45 and knew I didn't have time to eat because the show was starting at 9. I am now wild hungry. So I'm also upset at myself. Noah says, Kyle Williams getting a lot of hype. He'll be gone before the third round. Oh, that's because Jared here said wide receiver, maybe check out Jalen Royals or Kylan Williams. Kyle Williams in round 3 or 4, but Bond would be okay. Yeah, I've dabbled a bit with Jalen Royals out of Utah State and Kyle Williams from Washington State. Kyle Williams has a really good release package. Royals does some fun things with his size and the inside-outside versatility, the yards after the catch, some athleticism, some size. Again, wide receiver is going to be like probably the last position group I look at just because I don't see the Bills going for anybody until day 3. Now that I say that, they'll probably take a wide receiver at 30, and I'll jettison myself to the sun out of frustration. Well, maybe not depending on who it is, but yeah, wide receivers coming towards the end. I always do. I look at position groups in the draft class as a whole from not just from a Bills lens, but just football and scheme and structure and evaluation. But the way I look at it through a Bills lens is by starting with the biggest positions of need for the Bills. So, but heavy majority of my work right now has come through corner, interior defensive line, edge, safety, and that's been the heavy majority of those 4. And then I'll finish everything up as we go forward here. Ron says, who are some wide receivers who can take the top off the defense on day 3? Ron, I would love to answer that question. I have not done enough legwork on receiver to answer your question at this point. My initial thought coming into the draft would have been Jalen Noel from Iowa State, but he's more of a slot. And yeah, Thornton from Tennessee, who you just put, those are burners, guys that I watch in season that could take the top off from a broadcast perspective, but I got to dig in and watch the tape, and I'm just not there yet. Joe said, I said they were going to take Jack Sawyer on my show, so it looks like the day 2 picks are Sawyer and Higgins. Oof, man. Sawyer's arms are so short. He ticks the box from like a mentality and play style perspective, but the arms are so short, but it'll be interesting. Noah says, do you like Shepard from Colorado? In season, yeah, he's got some real juice. There were some fun dudes on Colorado aside from just like Travis Hunter, and Shepard was one of them. Yeah, some real good stop-start ability, short area burst, quickness, some long speed as well. How he can factor in just in the short game and some bubbles and screen game and a lot of different things. Yeah, I haven't watched him on tape yet again because I haven't gotten to receiver yet. But from a broadcast perspective, he was a guy I noted in season. Him and the guy in defense, number 7, whose name I always forget. He was a DB, but kind of played off ball and did a bunch of fun stuff for them too. I'll have to look into it and come back on the next episode. I'm mad at myself. But Ron says if we take Sawyer on day 2, I'll be pissed. He's going to struggle with his non-existent length. That's funny. Pete says it was this is spot on from Pete. He says it was way easier to be into scouting every position when the Bills needed everything and the offseason started in December. Yeah, with the Bills every week, the Bills go further into the playoffs is another week that I am behind on offseason prep, especially from a college standpoint and prospect standpoint. A lot of my work comes because I watch so much college football in season, but broadcast is a lie. So I build my framework out in season because I watch so much college football, and then I get to the tape as I can. But yeah, as the Bills go further every year, it gets worse and worse and harder. But it's a good problem to have. Throwing up the banner that says Toodles, folks, because we're going to start to wind down and say goodbye on this episode. If you have not already and you're watching live, please, and thank you, do drop a like on this video if you have not already. Likes are the lifeblood of these videos and these streams. So if you have not already, please, and thank you. If you're here on YouTube, drop a like on this video if you are watching live. If you are not watching live and you're watching later, that's cool too. Please drop a like on this video here on YouTube. Turn on notifications for the Disguise Coverage playlist. Subscribe to the Cover One channel as a whole and get yourself various levels of Bills coverage depending on what your fancy is or what type of poison you want to pick. If you're listening to this show on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's very much appreciated as well. Please rate and review and subscribe on whatever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about this show, about the brand. Word of mouth is tremendously appreciated. So if you enjoyed this episode or this show, please, and thank you. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about it. If you hated this show or you hate me or this episode, tell your enemies and try and make them watch it so you can ruin their day or night by making them watch something terrible. I appreciate you folks for joining me on this episode, whether you watched live, watched later, listened later, whatever have you, whatever form or fashion your consumption of this episode came in. I greatly appreciate it, and I thank you for it. I appreciate all the kind words coming in for myself in the chat, and I appreciate them very much. Charles says, when do we find out about top 30 visits? Usually April, like the last like 3-4 weeks leading into it. Kind of going through from there. If I remember correctly. Yeah, it's usually leading into that. Usually once pro days are done and all those types of things, you start getting the first week of April and they start running through and coming through. Paisan says, please, just a few more hours. I would love to, but I am super hungry, so I'm going to go eat and probably pass out because I'm also super tired. I appreciate you folks. Thank you very much to everyone for tuning in. I'm excited to really deep dive into a lot of position groups and prospects in the coming weeks leading up to the draft. So questions, thoughts, comments, concerns on prospects, position groups, anything and everything, leave them in the comments on YouTube. Get at me on Twitter at pro__ant. Get at me on Blue Sky at pro_ant. No underscores there. DM me, message me, at me, comment, whatever you got. I will try to get to anything and everything I can. If I missed anything from you in this episode, get at me in the comments here on YouTube or on Blue Sky or Twitter. Appreciate you folks. Thank you very much for the claps, Charles, and the kind words, Ty and RJ. Appreciate you as well, buddy. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for all the kind words throughout the episode and through the end. I appreciate it more than you know. Thank you very much. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you when I see you. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.